On my 70th birthday, I reserved the table where I proposed to my wife 42 years ago. I wanted to sit in her chair one last time, to feel her beside me, but when I arrived, the hostess would not look me in the eye. "Your daughter called, sir. She says you are not well, that you are having episodes." I stood in the cold, humiliated, erased. Then a little girl ran up to me holding a wildflower and said something that shattered everything I thought I knew about my own family. "Thank you so much for being here with me today. It truly means more than you know." Before the story continues, take a moment to let me know where you are watching from, your city or country. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Also, a quick note. This story contains some fictional elements added for educational and storytelling purposes. Any similarity to real people or settings is coincidental, but the message I am sharing with you is meant to be meaningful and helpful. On my 70th birthday, I stood outside the dining room at Biltmore Estate with October wind cutting through my wool coat, watching strangers celebrate inside the restaurant where my wife Ruth and I had marked every milestone for 4 decades. The windows glowed amber against the darkening Blue Ridge Mountains. Through the glass, I could see couples leaning close over candlelit tables. A grandmother, adjusting a little boy's napkin while he squirmed. A waiter, uncorking wine with practiced grace. The whole scene looked like something Ruth would have painted. Warm, complete. Everything a family should be. I was no longer part of that painting. I had made the reservation 3 weeks earlier, the morning after Dr. Callahan gave me a clean bill of health. "Sharp as a scalpel, Hank," he had said, shaking my hand. I had spent 40 years listening to hearts for a living. I knew what a healthy one sounded like. And mine was still beating strong. Walking out of his office, I had felt something I had not felt in 5 years. Not since Ruth collapsed in her garden among the flowers she loved. Hope, maybe 70, was not the end. Maybe there was still time to rebuild what had crumbled when she died. So I had called the dining room and reserved table 9. Our table. Tucked beside the stone fireplace where Ruth always insisted we sit. "It is the warmest spot in the restaurant," she used to say. Though I suspected she just liked the way firelight danced across the crystal glasses and made everything look like a memory worth keeping. Now, standing in the wind, I pulled out my wallet. Behind my driver's license was a photograph. Ruth and me, 1982, our wedding day. She wore a cream dress with wildflowers woven into her hair because she said real flowers were more honest than diamonds. I wore a borrowed suit, 2 sizes too large, and a grin that could have lit up the Smoky Mountains. We stood in front of the little stone chapel outside Asheville, laughing at something I could never quite remember. I only remembered the way she looked at me, like I was the only solid thing in a spinning world. 42 years. I whispered to the photograph, "Happy anniversary, sweetheart." The heavy oak door swung open, and warmth rushed out like an embrace. Roasted rosemary and wood smoke. Murmured conversation over soft piano. The clink of silver on porcelain. For one breath, I felt Ruth beside me, her cold fingers slipping into my palm the way they always did. "You are my personal furnace, Hank Dawson," she used to say. And I would pretend to complain and never once let go. Then I saw the hostess. Young auburn hair pinned neatly. A smile that collapsed the instant she read my name. Her eyes flicked to someone behind me. The manager stepped forward with clasped hands and a voice pitched low, the posture of a man delivering bad news. I had delivered enough terminal diagnoses to recognize it. "Mr. Dawson, I am afraid there has been a complication with your reservation." I glanced past him. Table 9 was occupied. A young couple sharing dessert. Oblivious. "I have a reservation. 7th. Henry Dawson." "Yes, sir. However, your daughter called this morning." He paused. "She expressed concern about your well-being. She indicated you have been experiencing confusion, memory difficulties. She worried you might become agitated in a public setting." The words hit like a fist to the sternum. "I do not have memory difficulties. I understand this must be frustrating. My voice climbed before I could catch it. I am not confused. I am here for dinner on my birthday, at the restaurant where I proposed to my wife, where we celebrated every anniversary, where I held her hand the last night she was strong enough to leave the house. The hostess stepped closer. Mr. Dawson, your daughter sounded very concerned. She mentioned episodes. Episodes. I tasted the word like copper. I do not have episodes. The manager touched my elbow gently. The way you guide a patient who might not make it down the hallway. Perhaps it would be best if you went home, sir. Called your daughter. I pulled my arm free. I would like to speak with someone in charge. I am in charge, Mr. Dawson. And given what your daughter described, I cannot seat you tonight. I had been deemed unfit at the restaurant where I knelt 42 years ago and asked Ruth Mary Calloway to be my wife, where she said yes before I finished the question, because she had known the answer since our second date. I stood there feeling the heat of the dining room on my face and the cold of the mountains on my back, caught between warmth and darkness, every eye in the entrance watching. An old man making a scene, an old man whose daughter had to call ahead and warn the staff. I see. I apologize for the inconvenience. I turned and walked back into the night. The door closed behind me with a soft click, the kind of sound a heart monitor makes when it flatlines. One clean tone, then nothing. On the stone steps, I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and scrolled to Meredith's number, straight to voicemail. This is Meredith Dawson Grant. Leave a message. It is Dad. I am at Biltmore. Or I was. They said you called. Said I am confused. Meredith, I do not understand what is happening. Please call me back. The screen stayed dark. Through the windows, I watched the grandmother pull the little boy onto her lap. He pressed his face against her neck, and she held him like he was the most precious thing alive. The firelight caught them in gold, and something in my chest cracked along a fault line I had been ignoring for 5 years. That should have been me. My family. My celebration. Instead, I stood in the dark, wondering if my own mind was betraying me. Had I canceled the reservation and forgotten? Was Meredith right? Dr. Callahan said I was fine. But doctors miss things. I had been one. I knew. I thought about the 5 years since Ruth died. The empty rooms. Dinners eaten standing over the sink. The conversations I held with her photograph each night before turning off the lamp. I would tell her about the garden, about the birds visiting her feeder. Maybe that was not normal. Maybe talking to a dead woman's picture was exactly the kind of thing a daughter would worry about. The wind carried fallen leaves and chimney smoke down from the mountains. I shivered. I should go home. Try to remember if I had done anything to make my only daughter warn a restaurant about her own father. I turned toward the parking lot. Then I heard a voice behind me. Mister, why are you standing in the cold all by yourself? I turned around. A girl stood on the stone path behind me, no older than 7, wearing a yellow raincoat dotted with cartoon ladybugs. Brown curls spilled from under her hood, damp from the evening mist. In her right hand she held a single wildflower, bright gold with 4 delicate petals that caught the light from the restaurant windows. She held it the way you would hold something you had rescued rather than picked. I stared at the flower. My throat tightened before I understood why. Sundrops. Onothera fruticosa. Ruth had planted a whole row of them along the south wall of her garden. They were her favorites because they bloomed in the evening when most flowers closed, and Ruth always said the best things in life happened after dark. Anniversaries. Stargazing. Conversations that mattered. I had not seen sundrops growing wild in Asheville in years. Do you know what this flower is called? The girl asked, lifting it toward me. I found it by the parking lot. Nobody I asked knows its name. But you look like somebody who knows about flowers. I crouched down slowly, my knees protesting. It is called a sundrop, I said. They bloom in the evening when everything else is closing up. She studied the flower with serious eyes. So they are brave. Something about the way she said it made my chest ache. Yes, I suppose they are. A man appeared behind her, hurrying across the wet path. Mid-30s, dark hair, work jacket, still carrying the faint smell of soil and green things. He put his hand on the girl's shoulder with the practiced ease of someone who had been catching up to her for years. Rosie, you cannot just run up to strangers. I am sorry, sir. She sees someone standing alone and decides they need company. He smiled, tired but genuine. It is her superpower and my cardiac event. I straightened up. She is fine. She just taught me something about flowers. The man extended his hand. Sam Keller. I work at the Biltmore Gardens. This is my daughter Rosie. We were cutting through to the parking lot when she spotted you. Henry Dawson. I shook his hand. His grip was firm and calloused, the kind built by years of digging in earth rather than shaking hands across conference tables. Rosie tugged my sleeve. Are you eating dinner by yourself, Mr. Henry? The directness of children. No filter. No diplomacy. Just the question that cuts to the bone. I was going to, I said carefully. But the restaurant is full tonight. Sam's eyes moved to the entrance behind me, then back to my face. He saw something there. I do not know what. Maybe the redness around my eyes. Maybe the way I held my collar like a man bracing against more than wind. We were heading to Rosalie's, he said, nodding down the street toward a small restaurant with a green awning and warm light spilling from its windows. Nothing fancy. Best biscuits in Asheville, though. You are welcome to join us if you would like. I should have declined. I was 70 years old, standing in the rain with strangers, and my daughter apparently thought I was losing my mind. The appropriate thing was to go home, take a hot shower, call Meredith again. But Rosie looked up at me with her hand still on my sleeve and said, "Nobody should eat alone on their birthday. That is a rule in our house." Something in those words broke through every wall I had built since Ruth's funeral. Not the logic of them, the certainty. This child believed it the way she believed in gravity, a fact of the universe. Beyond argument. All right, I heard myself say. If you are sure. We are sure, Sam said. Rosalie's was warm and small and smelled like butter and coffee. A booth by the window, red vinyl seats, paper placemats with drawings of the Blue Ridge Mountains, the kind of place Ruth would have loved because the food was honest. And nobody tried too hard. Rosie ordered pancakes for dinner because, she informed me, it was a special occasion. Sam ordered a burger. I ordered salmon and found, to my surprise, that I was hungry for the first time in weeks. She talked the way rivers run, constant and winding and impossible to stop. Her teacher was Mrs. Patterson. Her best friend was a girl named Juniper, who had a pet lizard called Sergeant Scales. She was learning to read chapter books. She wanted to be a botanist or a veterinarian or maybe both, because animals and plants both needed doctors. She has an opinion about everything, Sam said, watching his daughter with the quiet pride of a man who knew exactly how lucky he was. Rosie pulled crayons from her raincoat pocket and began drawing on her placemat. I watched her work, the tip of her tongue poking out in concentration, brown curls falling across her face. How long have you two been in Asheville? I asked Sam. 3 years. He sipped his coffee. I got the job at Biltmore Gardens right after I adopted Rosie. Adopted. The word rearranged something in my understanding. She was in the foster system, Sam said quietly, glancing at Rosie to make sure she was absorbed in her drawing. I was a foster kid myself, aged out at 18, with nothing but a backpack and a library card. When I saw Rosie's file, I just knew. He shrugged like it was simple. She needed somebody. I needed somebody. The math worked out. Before I could respond, Rosie pushed her placemat across the table. On it, drawn in crayon with the fierce commitment of a 7-year-old artist, was a yellow flower with a smiling face. Next to it, a stick figure man with gray hair holding the flower. Above them both, in careful capital letters, she had written, "Happy birthday, Flower Grandpa." My vision blurred. I took off my glasses and pressed my fingers to my eyes, pretending to clean the lenses while I pulled myself together. In 40 years of surgery, I had held dying hearts in my hands, without flinching. A crayon drawing on a paper placemat undid me completely. "This is the best gift anyone has given me in a very long time," I said when I trusted my voice again. "You can keep it," she said proudly. "I even signed it. See?" She pointed to a wobbly R in the corner. The meal ended. Sam insisted on paying. I protested. He would not hear of it. At the door, I shook his hand again and thanked them both for turning a difficult night into something I would remember. Rosie hugged me, fierce and fast, the way children do before they learn to be cautious about affection. Then she stepped back and reached into her pocket for the sundrop she had carried all evening. She held it up to her nose, breathing in, and as she tilted her head forward, the restaurant light fell across her face. I stopped breathing. Her fingers were curled around the stem in a spiral, pinching gently just below the petals. Not the way children usually grip flowers, crushing and careless, but carefully, deliberately, the exact way Ruth used to hold every flower she ever touched, a habit so specific, so uniquely hers, that I had spent 5 years believing I would never see it again. And her eyes. Under the warm light, the hazel I had noticed earlier shifted, olive green, with flecks of gold around the iris, a color I had only ever seen in one face in my entire life. I watched them walk away into the misty night, Sam's hand on Rosie's shoulder, their laughter trailing behind them like music. And I stood on the sidewalk outside Rosalie's, holding a crayon drawing and a truth I could not yet name, knowing only that something inside me had just tilted on its axis and would never sit level again. I did not sleep that night. I tried. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, spinning its slow circles in the dark, but every time I closed my eyes I saw olive green irises flecked with gold and small fingers curled around a flower stem in a spiral that should not have been familiar but was. At 3 in the morning I gave up. I pulled on my robe and walked downstairs, through the back door, and into Ruth's garden. The garden filled nearly half an acre behind the house. Ruth had spent 30 years building it, one plant at a time, until it became a living map of our marriage. Lavender, from our trip to Provence. Japanese maples from the year Meredith was born. Black-eyed Susans because Ruth said they were the friendliest flowers in North Carolina. And along the south wall, a row of sundrops that bloomed each evening like small golden lanterns guiding her home. I sat on the wooden bench she had placed beneath the willow tree. The bench where she read novels on summer afternoons. The bench where I found her asleep one September evening. A book open on her chest. The sunset turning her hair to copper. The bench where I sat the night after her funeral and talked to her for 3 hours because I did not know how to stop. I talked to her now. "Ruth," I said to the dark garden and the sleeping flowers and the mountains I could not see but knew were there. "I met a little girl tonight. She was holding one of your sundrops, and she had your eyes." The wind moved through the willow branches. No answer. There never was. But I kept talking anyway, because 5 years of practice had made it feel less like grief and more like prayer. "She held the flower the way you did. That spiral thing with your fingers. Nobody does that, Ruth. Nobody ever did that. Except you." I went inside and climbed to the study. The photo albums were on the top shelf where I had put them after the funeral, unable to look at them, unable to throw them away. I pulled down the one labeled Ruth. Early years. My hands were not steady. Page 7. Ruth at 23. The year we met. Standing in her mother's garden in Hendersonville, holding a bunch of wildflowers against her chest, brown curls falling across her face, head tilted slightly to the left. That smile, and those eyes. Olive green catching the afternoon light exactly the way Rosie's had caught the restaurant light 6 hours ago. I turned the page. Ruth at 25, our first anniversary. Kneeling in the garden of our first apartment, planting something I could not identify from the photograph. her fingers wrapped around a seedling stem in that precise spiral grip. The same grip, exactly the same, page after page. Ruth at 27, 30, 35. The face matured. The hair changed. But the eyes never did. And every photograph where she held a flower or a plant or a blade of grass, the fingers curled the same way. A habit written into her bones. A habit I had just watched a 7-year-old stranger perform on a sidewalk in Asheville. I closed the album and pressed my palms flat against the cover, breathing slowly the way I used to breathe before opening a patient's chest. Steady. Controlled. The surgeon's rhythm that kept your hands from shaking when the stakes were absolute. There had to be an explanation. Coincidence. Pattern recognition, gone haywire, from grief and loneliness. An old man seeing his dead wife in every child's face because he missed her so desperately that his brain was manufacturing connections. But I had spent 40 years in medicine. I knew the difference between coincidence and diagnosis. And what I had seen tonight did not feel like coincidence. The doorbell rang at 9 the next morning. I had not slept. I was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee I had not touched, staring at the album open to Ruth at age 7. Brown curls, olive eyes, a gap-toothed smile holding a fistful of daisies. Eleanor Marsh stood on my porch holding a foil-covered casserole dish and wearing the concerned expression she had been perfecting since Ruth died. "Morning, Hank." "Chicken pot pie." "Gerald's recipe." She set it on the counter and poured herself coffee without asking, which was Eleanor's way. We made small talk, the weather turning cold, the leaves peaking early this year. The new family who had moved into the Henderson house down the road. Then Eleanor set her mug down carefully and looked at me the way she looked at her crossword puzzles when one clue did not fit. "Meredith came by last week," she said, my hand stilled on my coffee cup. "She was here? Tuesday afternoon. Said she was in the neighborhood. Asked how you were doing." Eleanor paused. Then she started asking specific questions. "Had I noticed you being forgetful? Had you said or done anything unusual? Had you seemed confused or disoriented?" The kitchen went very quiet. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you are sharper than most people I know and twice as stubborn." Eleanor studied me. "Hank, what is going on?" I did not answer. I was doing arithmetic. Meredith visits Eleanor on Tuesday, asking about confusion. Meredith calls the restaurant on Friday, warning about episodes. A pattern. Not random concern. A campaign. After Eleanor left, I walked to the master bathroom. The medicine cabinet held the usual inventory. Blood pressure medication, vitamin D, aspirin, allergy pills for the ragweed season Ruth always called my annual surrender to nature. But pushed to the back, behind the aspirin, was a bottle I had never seen before. Diazepam. 5 milligrams. Take 1 tablet daily for anxiety. Patient. Henry J. Dawson. Prescribing physician. Dr. Paul Whitfield. I turned the bottle in my hands. I had never heard of Dr. Paul Whitfield. I had never been prescribed diazepam. I had never had an anxiety disorder in my life. In 40 years of cardiac surgery, I had opened human chests while hearts were still beating. Anxiety was not in my vocabulary. The bottle was nearly empty. 28 tablets prescribed 2 months ago. 6 remaining. 22 pills gone, and I had not swallowed a single one. I set the bottle on the counter and stared at it the way I used to stare at a patient's scan when the diagnosis was obvious but your mind refused to accept it. 2 months ago. That was when Meredith started coming to the house twice a week to cook dinner. "You should not eat alone every night, Dad," she had said. "Let me take care of you." Thoughtful meals, generous portions, and after every dinner, a heaviness that pressed me into the couch like a stone on my chest. I would barely make it upstairs before my eyes closed. I had blamed age, grief, the natural exhaustion of a body that had outlived its purpose, but 22 pills were missing from a bottle I had never opened. And every night my daughter cooked for me, I had fallen asleep before I could think straight. I picked up the bottle again. Read the label one more time. Dr. Paul Whitfield. A physician I had never met. Prescribing medication I had never requested. For a condition I had never had. And my daughter, who had been asking neighbors about my mental state and calling restaurants to warn them about my confusion, had been in my kitchen twice a week for 2 months, cooking meals that left me unable to climb the stairs. My hands were shaking now. Not from age. Not from cold. From the kind of clarity that arrives like a scalpel through fog. Sharp and merciless and impossible to unsee. My daughter was not worried about me. She was building something, and I was only just beginning to understand what it was. The surgeon in me took over. When you spend 4 decades diagnosing what is killing a patient, you develop a method. You do not guess. You gather evidence, read the data, and follow where it leads, even when it leads somewhere you do not want to go. I started with the safe. It was hidden behind a watercolor painting of Ruth's garden that Meredith had commissioned for my 65th birthday. A local artist had spent 3 days capturing the sundrops and the lavender and the Japanese maples in their October glory. Ruth had cried when she saw it. "It is like looking at our whole life," she had said. "Every flower is a year we had together." Now I swung the painting aside and spun the combination. Inside were the documents I had organized for decades. Property deeds, stock certificates for Dawson Heart Institute, insurance policies, bank statements filed by month in labeled folders. The bank statements were wrong. I spread them across the desk. January, February, March, then a gap. July, August, September, April, May, and June were missing. 3 months erased. And those 3 months corresponded exactly to the period when I had begun feeling foggy. When Meredith's dinners left me so exhausted that whole evenings disappeared into dreamless black, I called the bank's 24-hour line. After security questions and 2 transfers, a representative named Angela pulled up my account. "Mr. Dawson, there are 2 authorized users. Yourself and Meredith Dawson Grant. She was added 8 months ago with full access. I did not authorize that. Our records show you visited the branch in person, sir. Your signature is on file. I had not been to that bank in over a year. Have there been unusual withdrawals?" Keys clicked. "Multiple transfers to an external account over 5 months." She paused. "Approximately $340,000. I wrote the number on a notepad. The pen barely moved because my hand had gone numb. I ended the call and sat in silence, staring at the evidence spread across my desk like an autopsy table, which, in a way, it was. I was performing an autopsy on my own life. Behind the bank statements, in a manila folder I did not recognize, I found the document that made the room tilt. Psychiatric evaluation. Confidential. Patient. Henry James Dawson. Age 70. Evaluating physician. Dr. Paul Whitfield. MD. Board-certified psychiatrist. I read it standing because I could not trust my legs. Patient exhibits persistent anxiety disorder with marked cognitive decline. Short-term memory impairment observed during clinical interview. Confabulation. Poor judgment. Diminished capacity for independent decision-making. Recommendation. Immediate petition for guardianship. Patient poses risk to self and financial assets if left unsupervised. Every word was a lie. I had never met Dr. Paul Whitfield. I had never sat for a psychiatric evaluation. I had rebuilt a cardiac surgery department from nothing. Trained 217 residents. Held hearts in my hands and put them back together. And now a man I had never met had reduced my entire life to a diagnosis of incompetence. I set the evaluation beside the bank statements and the diazepam bottle. 3 pieces. 3 threads of the same web. Then I went to the security system. I had installed cameras after Ruth's death, when the house felt too empty, and every sound at night felt wrong. The system stored 90 days of footage on a hard drive in the basement. I scrolled through the recordings. Most nights showed nothing. Raccoons on the porch, the garden gate in wind, my own shadow moving through the kitchen at odd hours. But 4 nights stood out. 6 weeks ago. 11:14 in the evening. The footage ran normally, then jumped to 11:41. 27 minutes gone. A clean cut in the recording, as if someone had excised the footage the way I would excise damaged tissue from a heart. 5 weeks ago. 9 minutes missing. 3 weeks ago. 18 minutes erased. 10 days ago. 12 minutes gone. 4 nights. 4 gaps. Someone had been in my house, moving through my rooms, accessing my documents, and carefully removing evidence of their presence. Not clumsily. With the precision of someone who understood security systems and had a key to my front door. I knew who had a key. I had given it to her myself after Ruth's funeral. In case of emergency, I had said. So you can check on me. I sat at my desk and laid everything in order. The diazepam from a doctor I had never met. Bank statements with 3 months missing and $340,000 gone. A psychiatric evaluation diagnosing conditions I did not have. Security footage with surgical gaps on 4 separate nights. And underneath it all, my daughter's visits. Her dinners that left me, unable to think. Her questions to neighbors. Her call to the restaurant. The diagnosis settled into place, the way a fractured bone settles into alignment, not gently, but with terrible clarity. This was not concern. This was architecture. A structure built from lies and medication and forged documents, assembled piece by piece over months with the patience of someone who understood that the best way to cage a man was to convince him he belonged in the cage. I looked at the painting of Ruth's garden hanging above the open safe. Ruth's flowers. Ruth's life on canvas. And behind that painting, the safe where Meredith had been stealing from me for months. She had hung the portrait of everything her mother loved, directly over the place where she was dismantling everything her mother built. There was a cruelty in that precision I could not yet comprehend. But I was beginning to. I closed the safe, gathered the evidence, and sat as Saturday afternoon light crept across the floor. I thought about a 7-year-old girl with olive eyes, who held flowers the way my dead wife did. Because if Meredith was capable of drugging her own father, stealing his money, forging documents to lock him away, then what else had she done? What other secrets had she buried? And what did a little girl named Rosie have to do with any of it? The questions multiplied in the silence. And for the first time since Ruth died, the silence did not feel empty. It felt dangerous. Sunday morning I woke at the kitchen table with my face pressed against the folder of evidence, and a stiff neck that reminded me I was no longer young enough to fall asleep in chairs. The coffee beside me was cold, the house was silent, and the question from last night was still sitting in the room like an uninvited guest. What did Rosie have to do with any of this? I made fresh coffee and carried it to my study. If Meredith had been building a case against me for months, there was a reason beyond money. $340,000 was significant, but Dawson Heart Institute was worth $22 million. The psychiatric evaluation, the drugged meals, the neighbor interviews. It was too elaborate for simple theft. She was constructing something larger, a cage with no exit. And in my experience, people only built cages that thorough when they were protecting a secret worth more than whatever the cage cost. I sat at my computer and did what I had done for 40 years when a patient's symptoms did not add up. I went back to the beginning and looked for what I had missed. Meredith was 39 years old. She had worked at Dawson Heart Institute since she was 27. Before that, she had gone to Duke for business, graduated with honors, spent 2 years at a consulting firm in Charlotte. Her resume was clean and linear, every year accounted for. Except one. 2016. The year Meredith turned 31. The year she told Ruth and me she had been accepted into an advanced healthcare finance program in Nashville. 6 months of intensive study, she had said. A career opportunity she could not pass up. Ruth had been proud. I had written the tuition check without hesitation. She had left in September and returned in March of the following year. Different, quieter, thinner. She had thrown herself into work at the Institute with a focus that bordered on obsession. And Ruth and I had told each other she was simply driven, ambitious, our daughter finding her path. What if the path had led somewhere we never imagined? I picked up the phone and called David Chen, an old colleague who had left Asheville 10 years ago to run the cardiology department at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville. We had kept in touch the way former surgeons do, annual Christmas cards and occasional consultations. "David," I said when he answered, "I need a favor. And I need you to trust me when I say I cannot explain why yet." David was quiet for a moment. Then he said what good doctors always say. "Tell me what you need. I need you to check admission records at your hospital and any affiliated facility in the Nashville area. The name is Mary Daniels. The year is 2016. I am looking for a maternity admission." He called back 2 hours later. "I found her," he said. Mary Daniels, age 31. Admitted to Vanderbilt University Medical Center on March 3, 2016. Vaginal delivery. Healthy baby girl. 6 pounds 11 ounces. Mother discharged March 5th. He paused. "The address on file is a post office box. No insurance on record. She paid cash. Cash. No insurance. A post office box instead of a home address. The profile of someone who did not want to be traced. Anything else in the record?" Emergency contact was left blank. The attending nurse noted the patient seemed anxious and declined all social work referrals. She also declined to have the baby's father listed on the birth certificate. David hesitated. "Hank, what is this about? I cannot tell you yet. But thank you." After we hung up, I stared at the notes I had scribbled. Mary Daniels, 31 years old, in 2016. Meredith was 31 in 2016. Mary Daniels delivered a baby girl in Nashville in March 2017. Meredith returned from Nashville in March 2017, but I needed more than parallel timelines. I needed the connection between Mary Daniels and the child who ended up in the foster system, the child who ended up with Sam Keller, the child who held flowers, like my wife. I spent the next 3 hours on my laptop. Tennessee adoption records were sealed by law, but I had spent decades navigating medical bureaucracy. I knew which databases cross-referenced with hospital records. I knew which county clerk offices still filed paper records that could be requested through formal channels. And I knew a family law attorney in Knoxville named Grace Yamamoto who owed me a favor after I had operated on her father's heart 12 years ago. "Grace," I said when she answered, "I need to understand how a closed adoption works in Tennessee." She walked me through it. Biological mother surrenders parental rights. Child is placed through an agency or intermediary. Records are sealed by court order. She walked me through it. Neither party can access the other's identity without a judge's approval. "What if the adoption was not through a licensed agency?" I asked. "Then it gets complicated," Grace said carefully. "Private adoptions through intermediaries exist in a gray area. If the intermediary is not properly licensed, the entire process could be considered illegal. Can you search for a closed adoption filed in Tennessee in 2017? Biological mother listed as Mary Daniels? I will see what I can find. It may take a day or two." While I waited, I went back to the hospital record David had sent me. Mary Daniels. I said the name aloud in my empty study, and something caught in my throat. Mary. Ruth's full name was Ruth Mary Dawson. Mary had been her middle name, inherited from her grandmother, a name she had always loved. When Meredith was born, Ruth had wanted to give her the middle name Mary as well, continuing the tradition. But Meredith had ended up with the middle name Dawson instead, hyphenated into her married name. Mary Daniels. My daughter had walked into a Nashville hospital, created a false identity, and named herself after her own mother. As if even while lying about everything else, even while preparing to abandon a child she had carried for 9 months, she could not completely erase the woman who raised her. She had taken Ruth's name and worn it like a disguise, and I did not know whether that made me want to weep or scream. I opened the photo album again. Ruth at 23, holding wildflowers. Rosie at 7, holding a sundrop. The same eyes, the same hands, the same instinct for flowers that could not be taught because it was not learned. It was inherited. 8 years ago, my daughter had gone to Nashville. She had told us she was studying healthcare finance. She had told us she was building her career. Instead, she had given birth to a baby girl, filed false paperwork, and disappeared back into her life as if nothing had happened. And somewhere in Tennessee, that baby had been handed to strangers, had passed through a failed adoption, had entered the foster system, and had eventually landed in the arms of a man named Sam Keller, who worked in a garden and taught her to love the things that grew in dirt. Ruth had spent her whole life growing things, and the granddaughter she never knew existed had been growing in the same soil all along, 4 hours down the highway, waiting to be found. I closed the laptop and looked out the window at Ruth's garden. The sundrops along the south wall were closed now, sleeping through the daylight hours the way they always did. But tonight, they would bloom. They always bloomed. Even when no one was watching. My daughter had buried a secret in Nashville 8 years ago. She had assumed it would stay buried. She had not counted on a little girl holding a wildflower in front of a restaurant on a rainy October night, looking up at a stranger and asking if he knew its name. I called Sam on Tuesday morning. My hand hovered over the phone for 10 minutes before I dialed, because once I said what I was about to say, there would be no taking it back. Some words rearrange the world permanently, the way a scalpel rearranges tissue. You cannot uncut. Sam answered on the second ring. Mr. Dawson, is everything all right? I need to see you. Without Rosie. Can we meet today? A pause. The greenhouse at Biltmore Gardens, he said. I am working until noon. 12:30. The greenhouse was a cathedral of glass and green. Orchids hung from the ceiling, their roots trailing like pale fingers. The air was thick with the smell of wet soil and blooming things. It reminded me of Ruth's garden after rain. Sam was waiting beside a row of potted ferns, work gloves tucked into his back pocket, soil under his fingernails. He studied my face and pulled 2 folding chairs from behind a workbench without a word. We sat among the orchids. I did not know how to begin. So I began the way I began every difficult conversation in 40 years of medicine, with the truth. Sam, I said, I think Rosie might be my granddaughter. He did not laugh or stand up or tell me I was crazy. He went very still and looked at me with eyes that were already calculating, already connecting pieces I had not yet shown him. Tell me everything, he said. So I did. The resemblance to Ruth, the way Rosie held flowers, the diazepam and the missing money, the forged evaluation, then Nashville, Mary Daniels, the hospital record, the closed adoption, the timeline that lined up with my daughter's 6-month absence, like bones on an X-ray. Sam listened without interrupting. When I finished, the greenhouse was quiet, except for water dripping somewhere among the ferns. Mary Daniels, Sam said slowly. That is the name on Rosie's foster file. Biological mother, Mary Daniels. Age 31. Father unknown. The confirmation felt like the moment in surgery when you open the chest and find exactly the damage you feared. You were right. And being right is terrible. Tell me about the foster file, I said. Sam spoke carefully. The way a man speaks when he has told a story many times, but never to someone who mattered this much. Rosie was adopted as an infant by a couple in Knoxville, the Pierces, good people from what the file said. They had her for 4 years, then they divorced. Neither wanted custody. She went back into the system, bounced between 2 foster homes before I found her. How did you find her? Sam looked at the orchids above us. I was a foster kid myself, aged out at 18 in Knoxville. No family, no safety net, just a GED and a job at a plant nursery that paid $7 an hour. He paused. I know what it feels like to be a child nobody chose. When I saw Rosie's file, when I read that she had been returned by her adoptive parents like something ordered by mistake, I just knew. He turned to me. She was 4. Had not spoken a full sentence in 6 months. The psychologist said, attachment disorder. I took her home and she sat on my kitchen floor for 3 hours, holding a potted plant I had left by the door. Did not speak. Did not cry. Just held that plant like it was the only thing in the world she trusted. My throat closed. I thought of Ruth in her garden, hands in the dirt, surrounded by growing things. I thought of Rosie in her yellow raincoat running through flowers. The same instinct, the same language. A conversation with the earth that skipped a generation and found its way home. She talks now, Sam said with a small smile. Plenty. But she still holds plants when she is scared. And she asks about her mother every night. Every single night, before bed. She asks if her mom is looking for her. I turned away and pretended to study an orchid beside me while I pressed my fingers against my eyes. Because I knew the answer. Her mother was not looking for her. Her mother was making sure no one ever found her. When I trusted my voice, I said what needed to be said. We need a DNA test. If Rosie is my granddaughter, we need proof that cannot be argued with. Sam nodded. I can get a sample from Rosie. Hair from her brush. She will not know. I will contact Blue Ridge Genetics Lab here in Asheville. Grandfather kinship analysis. 5 business days for results. 5 days, Sam repeated. 5 days. And then we know. He stood and extended his hand. His grip was different this time. Not the polite handshake of a stranger outside a restaurant. This was the grip of a man entering a partnership he had not asked for but would not walk away from. I recognized it because I had the same handshake. The kind you develop when you have been strong for too long. If she is your granddaughter, Sam said. Then stopped. Started again. Rosie deserves to know she has family. That she was not thrown away. That someone shares her blood and would have loved her if they had known. She does have family, I said. And I intend to prove it. Sam pulled on his work gloves, then paused. One more thing. Rosie is playing a sunflower in her school play next month. She practices every night, stands in the kitchen holding a paper flower and says, I am the tallest thing in the garden and I am not afraid of anything. He looked at me. She gets that from somewhere. I drove home with the windows down despite the cold. The mountain air smelled like pine and wood smoke, and the particular sweetness of October in the Blue Ridge when everything is dying beautifully and the world is so vivid it hurts. Sam brought Rosie's hair sample at 9 that evening. A small plastic bag with 3 dark brown strands curled inside like question marks. I held it under the lamp and thought about how the answer to everything might be coiled inside something so small. Wednesday morning I called Blue Ridge Genetics Lab and scheduled the test. Grandfather kinship analysis. My sample and Rosie's. 5 business days. I sealed both samples in an envelope and wrote Rosie's name on the outside in careful letters. Then I sat at my desk looking at that envelope, the way I used to look at a patient's chart before surgery. Everything about to change. Everything resting on what we found inside. 5 days. 120 hours. Each one carrying the weight of a question that had been waiting 8 years to be answered. The email arrived at 6:47 on a Wednesday morning while I was standing in Ruth's garden, watching the sun come up over the Blue Ridge Mountains. I had been awake since 4, sitting on Ruth's bench with coffee going cold in my hands, waiting. Not for the sunrise. For the truth. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else. The screen glowed in the early light. Subject line. Results. Patient ID P. 2024-1103. Blue Ridge Genetics Laboratory. I opened the email. The PDF loaded slowly, or maybe my eyes were moving too fast, skipping lines, racing ahead of my own comprehension. Laboratory certification, chain of custody documentation, methodology notes, genetic marker analysis, pages of data that meant nothing and everything at the same time. I scrolled past all of it to the conclusion at the bottom of the final page. Based on the genetic analysis of the submitted samples, the probability that Henry James Dawson is the biological grandfather of the minor child identified as Rosie, foster care registry, is 99.98%. I sat down on the bench. Not because I chose to, but because my legs made the decision for me. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. I caught it against my knee and read the number again. 99.98. Not a possibility. Not a likelihood. A certainty. Rosie was my granddaughter. The words filled my chest like air rushing into lungs that had been holding their breath for 8 years without knowing it. I set the phone on the bench beside me and looked at the garden. Dawn light was touching the tops of the Japanese maples, turning their October leaves to fire. The lavender along the east path was silver with dew, and the sundrops along the south wall were closed, sleeping through the early hours the way they always did, waiting for evening to bloom. Ruth had planted every one of these flowers. She had knelt in this soil with dirt under her fingernails and sweat on her forehead. And that particular expression of concentration she wore, when she was building something she believed would outlast her. And she had been right. The garden was still here. The flowers still bloomed. And now I knew that something else she had made, something far more precious than any garden, was alive and well and 7 years old, and living 4 miles away with a man who taught her to love the things that grew in dirt. We have a granddaughter, Ruth. I said it aloud to the garden, to the bench, to the mountains and the morning, and the memory of a woman who had wanted this more than almost anything. Her name is Rosie, and she knows your flowers. The tears came then. I did not try to stop them. I had not cried like this since Ruth's funeral, and I was too old and too tired to pretend I was stronger than grief. So I sat on her bench in her garden and wept for the granddaughter we should have known, for the 8 years that had been stolen from us, for the little girl who asked about her mother every night before bed and never got an answer. I thought about Ruth's last night, the hospital room with its fluorescent light, and its smell of antiseptic and its mechanical beeping that I had spent 40 years listening to in other people's rooms and now had to endure in my wife's. She had been lucid until the end. That was both a mercy and a cruelty. She had taken my hand. Her fingers were cold, the way they always were. Promise me 2 things. Hank, anything. Take care of the garden. Do not let it die. I promise. And find a way to bring Meredith home. She is lost, Hank. She has been lost since before I got sick. Promise me, you will find her. I had promised. And I had kept the first promise. The garden was alive, tended every morning, every season, every year since she left. But the second promise, bring Meredith home, I had failed. Meredith had drifted further away with each passing month until she became a stranger who visited twice a week to cook meals that put me to sleep and steal from the safe behind her mother's painting. But now the second promise meant something different. Bring Meredith home did not mean what I had thought it meant. It did not mean reconciliation or Sunday dinners or the slow rebuilding of a relationship between a grieving father and his distant daughter. It meant this. It meant finding the truth. It meant discovering that Meredith had left a piece of herself in Nashville. A living, breathing piece with olive eyes and brown curls, and a gift for knowing the names of flowers. I picked up the phone and called Sam. He answered on the first ring. Did you get the results? 99.98, I said. Silence. Then a long exhale, shaky. The kind of breath that holds a sound halfway between relief and grief. I think he might have been crying too, but neither of us mentioned it. So it is real, he said quietly. It is real. Rosie is my granddaughter. Another silence. Then Sam's voice. Steadier now. What do we do? I looked at the garden. The sundrops were still closed. They would not bloom for hours. But they were there. Alive. Rooted. Waiting. We protect her, I said. Whatever comes next, Rosie comes first. Should we tell her? That you are her grandfather? The question ached. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to drive to Sam's house and kneel in front of that little girl and tell her she had a grandfather who would have loved her from her first breath if he had known she existed. I wanted to tell her about Ruth. About the garden. About the flowers that were hers by birthright. I wanted to give her every lost birthday and every missed Christmas and every bedtime story I should have read her for 7 years. But I could not. Not yet. She is 7 years old, I said. And she has already been through more than most people endure in a lifetime. If we tell her now, before we know what Meredith is planning, before we can guarantee her safety, we put her in the middle of something she cannot understand. Sam was quiet for a long time. You are right, he said finally. God, I hate that you are right. I looked at the bench beside me, at the phone with the DNA results still glowing on the screen, at Ruth's garden stretching out in every direction, alive with color and memory, and the invisible roots of a family I was only beginning to understand. There is something else, I said. Ruth made me promise 2 things before she died. Take care of the garden, and bring Meredith home. I paused. I kept the garden alive. But bringing Meredith home, I think that means something different now. I think it means bringing Rosie home. To this garden. To this family. To the place she belongs. Sam's voice was rough. Then let us bring her home. After we hung up, I sat on the bench for a long time. The sun had cleared the mountains, and the garden was flooded with light. Every leaf and petal sharp with morning. I looked at the sundrops along the south wall. Still closed. Still waiting. I found her, Ruth, I said. But to bring her home, I might have to destroy our daughter first. The wind moved through the garden. The Japanese maples rustled, and somewhere in the lavender, a single bee began its morning work. Moving from flower to flower with the patient certainty of something that knows exactly where it belongs. Sam called from Knoxville on a Thursday night. I was sitting in my study with the DNA results printed and filed in a folder I had labeled simply Rosie. The way a surgeon labels a case file before the first incision. Clean. Clinical. As if naming it properly could keep the contents from bleeding. His voice was different. Not the steady, measured tone I had come to rely on over the past 2 weeks. This voice was cracked down the middle, the sound of a man who had just learned something that changed the shape of the world. She did not just give Rosie away, Hank. She sold her. I set down my coffee. The mug touched the desk without a sound, but something inside me hit the floor. Tell me, I said. Sam had driven to Knoxville that morning. He had found the attorney who handled the adoption, a semi-retired family lawyer named Donald Varner, whose office occupied a single room above a dry cleaner on Chapman Highway. Varner had been reluctant to talk until Sam showed him the DNA results and explained that the biological mother had used a false identity. Once Varner understood the scope of what had happened, he opened his files. The Pierces, the couple who first adopted Rosie, had paid $75,000 to a private intermediary, Sam said. I could hear papers rustling on his end, the sound of documents being turned in shaking hands. The intermediary transferred the money to a personal bank account, registered under the name Mary Daniels. $75,000. My daughter had put a price on her own child. I gripped the edge of the desk and focused on breathing the way I used to focus before a bypass, counting the seconds between inhale and exhale, forcing rhythm into a body that wanted to collapse. There is more, Sam said. Varner kept copies of all correspondence related to the placement, including a letter from the biological mother. He read it to me. I listened with my eyes closed, standing in my study surrounded by 40 years of medical textbooks and framed certificates and photographs of a life I no longer recognized. The letter was handwritten, undated, addressed to Mr. Varner. I am writing to confirm the arrangement we discussed. The child is to be placed with the family you identified. I understand the fee has been transferred. I have the following conditions. First, the adoption must be closed. No identifying information can be shared with the adoptive family. Second, my father must never know. Under no circumstances can any record be linked to my real identity. Third, my mother would never forgive me if she knew I had a child and gave her away. This must remain buried. She cannot know. If these conditions cannot be guaranteed, the arrangement is off. Signed, M. My father must never know. My mother would never forgive me. This must remain buried. I opened my eyes. The study looked the same. The books, the certificates, the photograph of Ruth on the corner of the desk, smiling in her garden with dirt on her hands. Everything the same, and nothing the same. Sam, I said. Divorced when Rosie was 4. Varner said the adoption was already unstable. The wife had wanted a baby. The husband had not. When the marriage fell apart, neither fought for custody. Rosie went back to the state. A child purchased for $75,000 and returned like a product that failed to save a marriage. And Varner, I said. Did he know the intermediary was unlicensed? Sam's jaw tightened through the phone. I could hear it in his breathing. He says he suspected but did not investigate. The Pierces wanted a baby. Mary Daniels wanted the baby gone. Varner processed the paperwork and took his cut. He described it as a private placement. Technically legal in Tennessee if all parties consent. But the false identity changes everything. If the biological mother lied about who she was, the entire adoption is fraudulent. I thought about Meredith at 31. Standing in a Nashville hospital room, holding a newborn with olive eyes and brown curls. A baby she had carried for 9 months, felt kick inside her. Heard cry for the first time, and then she had handed that baby to a lawyer, taken $75,000, and driven back to Asheville to resume her life as Meredith Dawson Grant, CFO, dutiful daughter, a woman with no past and no child. I thought about Ruth. Ruth, who had sat on the porch with me one autumn evening, not long before she got sick, and said something I had filed away in the part of my memory where I kept things too painful to examine often. I wish Meredith would give us a grandchild someday, she had said. The sunset was turning the mountains purple and gold, and she was holding my hand, and her voice carried that particular wistfulness she reserved for the things she wanted most and knew she might never get. I want to see what kind of mother she will be. I want to teach her grandbaby to love the garden. You will, I had told her, squeezing her fingers. We have time, but we did not have time. Ruth died 14 months later, and the grandchild she wished for had already been born, already been sold, already been erased from the family records by a daughter who could not face the truth of what she had done. Meredith had heard Ruth say those words. She had sat at that dinner table and listened to her mother dream about grandchildren and had said nothing. She had looked Ruth in the eye and smiled and let her mother die without knowing that the granddaughter she prayed for was alive in Knoxville, 4 hours away, growing up in a house with people who would eventually give her back. That was the part I could not forgive. Not the money, not the lies, not even the drugged meals or the forged evaluations. Those were crimes against me, and I was old enough and strong enough to survive crimes. But letting Ruth die without the truth, letting my wife go into the ground believing she would never be a grandmother when her granddaughter was sleeping in a crib 200 miles down the interstate, that was something else entirely. That was a cruelty I did not have a medical term for. Sam, I said. Are you still there? I am here. I need you to send me a copy of that letter. And the financial records from Varner. Already done. Check your email. I opened my laptop. The documents were there. The letter in Meredith's handwriting, careful and deliberate, each word chosen the way a surgeon chooses an instrument. My father must never know. My mother would never forgive me. This must remain buried. But nothing stays buried forever. not in gardens and not in families. Sooner or later, whatever you plant pushes its way to the surface. It is the nature of living things to reach for light, no matter how deep you bury them. And Rosie had reached the light. A little girl holding a wildflower outside a restaurant on a cold October night, looking up at a stranger and asking if he knew its name. She had not known she was reaching for her grandfather. She had just been reaching, the way all growing things do, toward whatever warmth was closest. I closed the laptop and looked at Ruth's photograph, her garden smile, her dirty hands, her eyes that Rosie had inherited along with something deeper than color. A way of seeing the world that started with the soil and worked upward. You would have loved her, Ruth, I said. You would have taught her every flower in the garden, and she would have remembered them all. The house was silent. The photograph did not answer, but I sat there for a long time anyway, holding the printed letter in one hand and the DNA results in the other, balancing the proof of what my daughter had done against the proof of what she had made. I had not visited Ruth's garden with anyone since the morning she died. That is a sentence I need you to understand before I tell you what happened on Saturday, October 19th. Because without it, you will not grasp the weight of what a 7-year-old girl did in 45 minutes among the flower beds my wife spent 30 years building. Ruth's garden was sacred ground. It was the one place in my life where no one lied, where nothing was forged, where no one tried to drug me or steal what I had built. It was the place where I still heard her voice in the rustle of lavender and the slow creak of the willow bench. I had kept that space sealed like a surgical wound, clean, protected, untouched by anyone's hands but mine. And then Sam Keller called me on Friday evening and asked if he could bring Rosie to see the flowers. I almost said no. The word was already forming on my tongue, a reflex born from years of solitude and grief. But then I heard Rosie's voice in the background, high and bright, asking Sam if Flower Grandpa had sundrops in his yard. She had remembered. A 7-year-old girl I had met once, on the worst night of my life, had remembered the name of a flower I told her, bloomed only at dusk, and she wanted to see if I had them. I said yes before I understood why. They arrived at 10 in the morning. The October air was cool but generous, the kind of Asheville autumn that smells like wood smoke and damp earth and the last exhale of summer. Sam parked his truck in the gravel drive and helped Rosie out of the passenger side. She was wearing rubber boots with ladybugs printed on them and a green jacket 2 sizes too large. The sleeves rolled back to free her small hands. Her brown curls were pulled into a ponytail that had already begun to unravel. She looked up at the garden gate wrought iron, with Ruth's initials woven into the metalwork, and her olive green eyes went wide. "It's like a castle for flowers," she whispered. I opened the gate and let her walk in first. It was the first time in 4 years that someone other than me had stepped through that entrance. My chest tightened. I half expected the garden itself to reject her, the way the restaurant had rejected me, the way my daughter had rejected the truth. But the garden did not reject Rosie. If anything, it seemed to open for her. She moved through the beds with a confidence that startled me. She did not run or grab or pull. She walked slowly, the way Ruth used to walk, pausing at each cluster of color as though she were listening to a conversation only she could hear. She crouched beside the lavender border and rubbed a stem between her fingers, then lifted them to her nose. "Lavandula angustifolia," she said. I stopped walking. Sam, 3 steps behind me, stopped too. He looked at me with an expression I could not read, something between pride and confusion. "Rosie," I said carefully, "where did you learn that name?" She shrugged the way children shrug when they do not know the origin of something that lives inside them. "I just know it," she said. "Like how I know my own name." She moved to the next bed. Black-eyed Susans. She touched one gently, tilting the flower toward her face as though she were greeting it. "Rudbeckia hirta," she said. Then she looked at me. "They like full sun, but they can handle a little shade. They're tough." My hands were trembling. I put them in my coat pockets so she would not see. Over the next 30 minutes, Rosie identified 12 species in Ruth's garden by their Latin names. 12. She named Echinacea, purpurea, beside the stone wall. She recognized Monarda didyma near the bird bath and told me the leaves made good tea. She found the Japanese maple Acer palmatum and ran her fingers along the bark the way Ruth used to do every morning, checking for moisture. She knelt beside the Helleborus niger and told Sam that they bloomed in winter when everything else is sleeping. I counted each one. I wrote them down later that night, sitting at the kitchen table with the DNA results on one side and a blank legal pad on the other. 12 flowers, 12 Latin names. No hesitation, no guessing, no prompting from Sam or me. A 7-year-old girl who had spent most of her life in foster care, who had never taken a botany class, who had never met my wife, walked through Ruth's garden and named its children as though she had planted them herself. Sam stood beside me near the willow bench, while Rosie explored the far corner where the sundrops grew. He was quiet for a long time. "She does this at work," he finally said. "At the greenhouse. The other staff thinks she reads the plant tags, but she doesn't. She just knows. She'll walk up to a flat of seedlings and tell me what they need: more water, less light, different soil. She's 7, Hank. I don't have an explanation. I did not have one either. Not a scientific one. Ruth would have called it blood memory. The idea that certain knowledge lives in the body, passed down through generations, like eye color or the shape of a hand. I had spent my career in operating rooms, trusting only what I could see and measure and cut, but standing in that garden, watching Rosie hold a sundrop blossom with that same spiral grip thumb and forefinger pinching just below the petals, the flower resting against her palm like a small torch. I could not deny what I was seeing. She was Ruth's, not just genetically, not just on paper. She was Ruth's in the way she moved, the way she listened to living things, the way she held silence like a gift instead of an absence. Then my phone buzzed. I pulled it from my coat pocket and looked at the screen. One text message from a number I knew by heart. A number I had called 10,000 times over 39 years. A number that now felt like a blade pressed against my ribs. "Meredith. Interesting choice, Dad. Bringing strangers into Mom's garden. I thought that place was sacred to you." The blood drained from my face. I looked up, past the willow tree, past the stone wall, past the garden gate. The street beyond was empty. No car, no figure standing on the sidewalk. But she knew. She knew Rosie was here. She knew we were in the garden. She was watching, or someone was watching for her, and the message was clear. "I see you. I know what you're doing, and you have no idea what I'm willing to do next." Sam saw my face change. "What is it?" I turned the phone toward him. He read the message. His jaw tightened. "She's tracking you," he said quietly. Across the garden, Rosie was kneeling in the sundrop bed, cupping a golden blossom in both hands. She looked up at me and smiled Ruth's smile, whole and unbroken, and in that moment I understood something with the clarity of a surgical diagnosis. Meredith was not just stealing my money, or forging my records, or poisoning my food. She was erasing the only living proof that Ruth's love had continued into the next generation. She had sold this child, hidden this child, and now she was circling back to make sure the secret stayed buried. I put the phone back in my pocket. "Let her watch," I said. I spent 41 years cutting into the human heart. I opened my first chest cavity at 29, a mitral valve repair on a tobacco farmer from Hendersonville whose wife held a rosary in the waiting room for 6 hours. I performed over 4,000 surgeries after that. I built the Dawson Heart Institute from a 2-room clinic into a $22 million facility with 67 staff, 3 operating theaters, and a cardiac research wing that bore my wife's name. I retired at 66. Not because my hands had failed me, but because Ruth was dying and I wanted my last cuts to be in the garden, not in the chest of a stranger. I tell you this because on Monday morning, October 21st, I drove to the Institute for the first time in 4 years and walked through those doors, not as a surgeon, but as a patient, a man whose own daughter had diagnosed him as broken. The building had changed. My portrait, which had hung at the center of the founder's wall since 2003, had been moved to the far end of the corridor near the fire exit, half hidden behind a potted ficus. In its place hung a new photograph. Meredith Dawson, Grant, Chief Financial Officer, smiling in a navy blazer, with the Institute's logo on the pocket. She had not just moved into my office. She had moved me out of my own legacy. I walked past reception without signing in, down the east corridor, past the research wing, and straight to the corner office on the second floor, my office, the one with the window overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains, the one where Ruth used to bring me turkey sandwiches on Tuesdays with a sprig of lavender tucked into the napkin. Meredith was inside. She sat behind the mahogany desk my father and I built from a black walnut tree that fell during Hurricane Bonnie in 1998. She was on the phone. She wore a charcoal suit and pearl earrings I recognized as Ruth's. She saw me in the doorway and held up one finger. Wait the way you silence a subordinate, not the way you greet your father. Hang up the phone, Meredith. She studied me for 3 seconds, then told the caller she would ring back. She set the phone down gently, as though placing a chess piece. Dad, this is a surprise. Is it? I did not sit. In 4 years, you moved my portrait next to the fire exit and put yours in its place. You transferred $340,000 from my accounts into a subsidiary you created 8 months ago. You forged a psychiatric evaluation from a Dr. Paul Whitfield, a man I have never met, declaring me cognitively impaired. You put diazepam in my food during your dinner visits, 22 tablets over 2 months, and you erased 4 nights of security footage from this building. I delivered it the way I used to deliver a diagnosis, direct, clear, without false comfort. The kindest thing you can do with a terrible truth is say it quickly. Meredith stood and pressed both palms flat against the desk. You sound paranoid, Dad. This is exactly why I called the restaurant. This is why Dr. Whitfield recommended a full evaluation. You're 70, you live alone, you talk to a dead woman's garden every night, and now you're making accusations that sound like a conspiracy theory. They're not accusations, they're facts. They're papers you're misreading because your mind isn't what it used to be. My mind performed 4,000 open-heart surgeries, and now it can't remember whether it took its own medication. She was good, precise, cold, utterly, without hesitation. For one terrible, flickering moment, I almost believed her. That was the cruelest part of what she had built, a machine, designed to make me doubt the one instrument I had trusted my entire life. But I was not broken. I was standing in my own institute, looking at my daughter wearing my wife's pearls behind my father's desk, and I was seeing her clearly for the first time in 39 years. I also know about Mary Daniels, I said quietly. The change was instantaneous. Her composure cracked, not in a way a stranger would notice, but I was the man who had held her the day she was born. I saw it. A microfracture behind the eyes, a tremor in the left hand, the body betraying what the mouth refused to admit. I don't know who that is, she said. But her voice had dropped half a register. Mary Daniels, age 31, Nashville, March 2016. A healthy baby girl delivered at Vanderbilt, placed in a private adoption for $75,000. The mother used your grandmother's middle name as an alias. I paused. That child is now 7 years old. She held a sundrop in my garden 2 days ago and called me Flower Grandpa. Meredith's face went white, the color of surgical gauze, the color of surrender. Then she recovered in less than 4 seconds, straightened her spine, smoothed her jacket, and spoke in her flat corporate register. You need to leave, Dad, before I call security. She picked up the phone. Raymond, security on the second floor. My father is having an episode. 2 young guards appeared. Polite. Uncomfortable. Mr. Dawson, We've been asked to escort you out. I looked at Meredith one last time. She was already dialing another number, already building the next wall. But her left hand, the one that had tremored at Mary Daniels, was pressed flat against her thigh, hiding. I'm leaving, I told the guards. Tell your boss the next people who walk through that door won't be as polite as I am. I walked down the corridor, past my displaced portrait, through the glass doors, and into the October sun. I stood on the steps of the building I had built with my own hands, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I had written on a piece of paper 3 days ago. A number given to me by a contact at the Asheville Police Department, FBI, Elder Abuse Division, Western North Carolina Field Office. 2 rings. Agent Moral. My name is Henry Dawson. I'm a retired cardiac surgeon. My daughter is trying to steal my estate. She forged a psychiatric evaluation. She has been drugging my food for 2 months. And 7 years ago she sold my granddaughter for $75,000 under a false name. I have documents. I have a DNA test. And I need your help. A pause. Then, Dr. Dawson, can you come to our office this afternoon? I can come right now. The FBI field office in Asheville sits on the 3rd floor of a federal building on Patton Avenue, a block from the courthouse where Ruth and I were married in 1982. I had walked past that building 100 times and never imagined I would sit inside it, handing over documents that proved my daughter was a criminal. Agent Diana Morales met me in a gray conference room with a long table and a window facing the mountains. She was mid-40s, compact, dark hair pulled tight, with steady eyes that said she had heard terrible things and learned to hold them. Beside her sat Agent Frank Hobbs, late 50s, silver-haired, reading glasses on a chain, quiet the way experienced investigators are quiet. I placed the folder on the table. Bank statements showing the $340,000 transfer. The forged psychiatric evaluation signed by Dr. Paul Whitfield. The diazepam bottle. The adoption letter from attorney Donald Varner referencing Mary Daniels. The DNA results 99.98% kinship. Meredith's surveillance text from October 19th. Morales read each document in silence. 11 minutes. Then she looked up. Dr. Dawson, who is Paul Whitfield? That is exactly the question I've been asking. She turned her laptop toward me. The North Carolina Medical Board's database showed Dr. Paul Raymond Whitfield, licensed psychiatrist, geriatric specialty, office at 412 Merrimon Avenue, Asheville. License issued 2019. Degree from Meridian University School of Medicine. Residency at Coastal Behavioral Health in Wilmington. Board certified. Every line looked legitimate. But Morales was shaking her head. We flagged this name 6 months ago, she said, opening a second file. Meridian University closed in 2017 due to accreditation fraud. It operated 4 years out of a rented building in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Issued roughly 140 fake medical degrees. Coastal Behavioral Health has no record of a Paul Whitfield. And the office at 412 Merrimon Avenue is a co-working space. Shared desks, no medical equipment, no patient files. The man who signed a document declaring me mentally unfit, whose name was on a bottle of sedatives dissolving into my meals for 2 months, whose opinion my daughter planned to use for legal guardianship, that man was not a doctor. He had never been a doctor. There's more, Morales said. She clicked to a third screen. Real name, Paul Raymond Whitmore. 3 prior actions in 2 states. 2015 South Carolina fined him $45,000 for practicing without a license. 2018 civil suit in Georgia for fabricating patient records in an insurance fraud scheme, settled for $310,000. 2021 North Carolina Attorney General investigated elder care fraud cases in the Western region. Whitfield's name connected to 3 families. Investigation suspended, no cooperating witnesses. She looked at me. You'd be the 4th family, Dr. Dawson. And you have something the others didn't: documents. A DNA test and willingness to testify. Hobbs spoke for the first time. Deep, unhurried voice. In all three cases, the pattern was identical. An adult child managing the parents' finances engaged Whitfield to produce a psychiatric evaluation recommending guardianship. Whitfield prescribed sedatives to manufacture confusion symptoms. The child petitioned for emergency asset control. 2 of 3 petitions were granted. Combined losses exceeded $3.1 million. 3 families. 3 caged parents. And my daughter had hired the same man. How did Meredith find him? I asked. Morales pulled up a 4th file. Referral network. Whitfield doesn't advertise, he works through intermediaries. Attorneys, financial advisors, estate consultants. We've mapped this network for 18 months. She paused. Your daughter appeared on our radar 2 months ago. A flagged transaction, $28,000 from the Dawson Heart Institute to Meridian Health Corp. Listed as psychiatric consultation. Meridian Health Corp is a shell company registered in Delaware 7 months ago. Sole officer, Paul Whitmore, $28,000. To destroy my mind on paper. Added to the $340,000 transferred, the $75,000 from selling Rosie. The total approached $500,000 stolen from a man she called Dad, funding a lie built like a cathedral. Pillar by pillar, each stone designed to hold every crime stacked above it. What do you need from me? I said. Morales closed the laptop and folded her hands. We need you to record her. Face to face. In a location you control, where she feels confident enough to speak freely. We need her to confirm the transfers, the evaluation, ideally the adoption. If she mentions Whitfield by name, we build a RICO case connecting both of them to the network. You want me to wear a wire. We want you to have a conversation with your daughter while we listen. I looked out the window. The mountains were blue-gray, layered like pages of a book I had read my whole life without understanding the language. Ruth was buried on a hillside 3 miles away. Rosie was in school 12 miles from here, learning words she would need for a life about to change forever. And Meredith was somewhere in this city making calls designed to erase me. Ruth's garden, I said. She'll come if I ask. She'll come because she thinks I'm weak. Confused. Ready to surrender. She believes she's already won. When? I thought of Rosie kneeling in the sun-dropped bed, cupping a blossom, smiling with Ruth's eyes. I thought of the letter my father must never know. The pill bottle. The forged evaluation. The erased footage. And I thought of what Ruth would say if she sat beside me in this gray room. She would say, "Protect the garden." This Sunday, I said. At sunset. That's when the sun-drops bloom. Agent Morales arrived at my home on Wednesday afternoon with a black duffel bag and a technician named Kyle, who did not speak unless spoken to. They parked an unmarked sedan in the gravel drive and walked through the front door as though they had done this 1,000 times, because they had. Morales told me later that in her 11 years with the Elder Abuse Division, she had wired 37 homes, 14 restaurants, 9 nursing facilities, and 1 church. She had never wired a garden. Show me the layout, she said. I walked them through the back door and into Ruth's garden. The October light was copper and thin, the kind that makes everything in Asheville look like a painting you cannot afford. The lavender border had begun its autumn retreat, the stalks browning at the tips, but the black-eyed Susans still held their ground along the stone wall, and the Japanese maples were burning in shades of crimson that Ruth would have photographed from 6 different angles. The sundrops, stubborn as always, were closed against the afternoon sun, waiting for dusk to open. Morales stood at the center of the garden and turned a slow circle. She noted the willow bench, the stone path, the wrought iron gate with Ruth's initials, the waist-high border wall that separated the garden from the rear lawn, and the line of sight from each position to the street beyond. Where will she enter? Morales asked. The gate. She always comes through the gate. She parks on Chestnut Street and walks up the side path. Where will you be? The willow bench. That's where Ruth and I always sat. Meredith knows that. If I'm anywhere else, she'll suspect something. Morales pointed to the stone wall near the black-eyed Susans. Kyle. Camera 1 there, angled toward the bench. Low profile. Weatherproof housing. She pointed to the Japanese maple on the opposite side. Camera 2 in the canopy. Wide shot covering the gate to the bench. Audio pickup on the bench itself, directional, not omnidirectional. I want her voice clean, not wind. Kyle opened the duffel bag and began working without a word. He moved through the garden the way a surgeon moves through a body. Precise, minimal, aware of every structure around him. Within 40 minutes, he had installed 2 pinhole cameras smaller than acorns, a directional microphone disguised inside a piece of bark wedged against the bench's armrest, and a wireless transmitter hidden beneath a flagstone near the garden's north border. The monitoring van would park on Riverside Drive, 2 blocks east, with a direct signal line. Now the wire, Morales said. She handed me a device no larger than a shirt button, a body-worn transmitter that would clip inside the collar of my jacket. Backup audio, she explained, in case the garden microphone failed or Meredith moved the conversation indoors. She showed me how to activate it. Press once, hold for 2 seconds, release. A small vibration meant it was live. No lights, no sounds, nothing Meredith could detect. Dr. Dawson, Morales said as Kyle packed the empty duffel, I need to be direct with you. Sunday is not just about your daughter. If she confirms the connection to Whitfield Whitmore and mentions the financial transfers or the evaluation, we can tie her to a network that has defrauded at least 3 other families out of $3.1 million. A RICO indictment would mean federal charges for both of them. But if she doesn't talk, if she suspects anything, we lose the case, and she has time to destroy evidence. She'll talk, I said. How can you be sure? I looked at the willow bench where Ruth used to read on summer evenings, her feet tucked beneath her, a glass of sweet tea balanced on the armrest. I looked at the sundrop bed where Rosie had knelt 5 days ago, holding a golden blossom with the same spiral grip my wife had used for 30 years. Because I'm going to tell her I'm ready to sign the power of attorney. Morales raised an eyebrow. You'd offer that? I'd offer the moon if it made her believe she'd won. Meredith's weakness isn't greed. It's certainty. She is absolutely certain that I am a confused old man who can be managed. The moment she believes I've surrendered, she'll stop guarding her words. She'll explain. She'll justify. She'll tell me why everything she did was necessary and reasonable and for my own good. And every word will be recorded. Hobbs, who had been standing near the gate in silence, spoke. You understand the risk. If she realizes what's happening, she could become volatile. She could leave. She could destroy documents that same night. She could, I said. But she won't leave the garden. Not if she thinks she's about to get what she's wanted for 8 months. Morales looked at Hobbs. Something passed between them. A silent assessment built from years of partnership. Then Morales turned back to me. Sunday. We'll have 4 agents within a 2-block radius. Kyle will be monitoring from the van. Hobbs and I will be in the vehicle on Riverside Drive with live audio and visual. If at any point you feel unsafe, touch the left side of your collar with your right hand. That's the signal. We'll be inside the garden in under 90 seconds. 90 seconds is a long time, I said. Not for a man who spent 41 years with his hands inside a human chest. I almost smiled. Almost. After they left, I sat on the willow bench alone. The sun was dropping behind the mountains, and the garden was entering that brief window. Ruth loved most the 20 minutes between afternoon and evening, when the light turns golden and the sundrops begin to open, one by one, like small lanterns lit by an invisible hand. I watched them bloom. I counted 7, then 12, then too many to track. I thought about what Sam had said on the phone that morning. Hank, are you sure about this? Once it's done, it can't be undone. I was sure. Not because I wanted Meredith to suffer. Not because I wanted revenge. I was sure because somewhere in this city, a 7-year-old girl was falling asleep in a small bedroom, clutching a stuffed animal, dreaming of flowers she could name but could not explain, and the woman who had sold her, drugged her grandfather, and forged the documents to steal an empire was planning her next move. Ruth's voice, clear as October air. "Protect the garden." "I will," I said to the empty bench. "I promise." On Thursday morning, 2 days before the planned recording in Ruth's garden, a Buncombe County Sheriff's deputy knocked on my front door at 7:14 a.m. I know the exact time because I was standing at the kitchen counter pouring coffee, and the clock on the microwave read 7:14 when the knock came 3 sharp raps, evenly spaced, the kind of knock that does not belong to a neighbor or a friend. I opened the door. The deputy was young, mid-20s, clean-shaved, holding a manila envelope in his left hand and his badge in his right. He looked uncomfortable, the way people look when they have been ordered to do something they do not fully understand. "Mr. Henry Dawson? Dr. Henry Dawson." "Yes, sir. I've been instructed to serve you with an emergency petition filed in Buncombe County Superior Court." He held out the envelope. "You have 72 hours to respond." I took the envelope. The deputy nodded, avoided my eyes, and walked back to his cruiser. I stood in the doorway and watched him drive away, the gravel crunching under his tires like small bones breaking. Then I closed the door, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the envelope with steady hands, because if 41 years of surgery taught me anything, it was that you do not let your hands shake when the situation demands precision. The document was 14 pages long. I read every word. It was a petition for emergency guardianship and conservatorship, filed by Meredith Dawson Grant on behalf of Henry James Dawson. Case number 2, 4CVS 4471. The petition requested that Buncombe County Superior Court appoint Meredith as my legal guardian and conservator, granting her full authority over my medical decisions, financial accounts, real property, and business interests, including the Dawson Heart Institute. The grounds cited were as follows: progressive cognitive decline, consistent with early-stage dementia, confirmed by psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Paul Whitfield, documented episodes of confusion and disorientation, including an incident at the dining room at Biltmore Estate on October 15th, inability to manage personal finances, as evidenced by irregular account activity and a pattern of erratic social behavior, including forming inappropriate attachments to strangers. That last line hit me like a scalpel to the sternum. Inappropriate attachments to strangers. She meant Sam and Rosie. My daughter had taken the single most beautiful thing that had happened to me since Ruth's death, a 7-year-old girl handing me a wildflower in the rain, and weaponized it into evidence of my insanity. I called Martin Gallagher. Martin was 73, a retired trial attorney who had handled Ruth's estate and my business contracts for 20 years. He lived in a stone cottage on Town Mountain Road and spent most of his time fly fishing on the French Broad River. He answered on the first ring because Martin always answered on the first ring, a habit from 40 years of litigation that he could not break. "Hank, it's 7:30 in the morning. Meredith filed for emergency guardianship." Silence. Then, "Read me the case number." I read him the number, the filing date, the judge's name, the Honorable Patricia Kwan, and the key allegations. Martin listened without interrupting, another courtroom habit. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "She's moving fast, Hank. An emergency petition means she's asking the court to act before a full hearing. If Judge Kwan grants a temporary order, Meredith could have control of your accounts and medical decisions within 48 hours. Can she do that based on Whitfield's evaluation? If the court doesn't know Whitfield is a fraud, yes. On paper, his evaluation looks professional. It lists specific symptoms, recommends guardianship, and carries what appears to be valid board certification. A judge reviewing an emergency petition doesn't have time for a deep investigation. She relies on the documentation presented. My chest tightened. Not with fear, but with the cold recognition of how carefully Meredith had built this. Every piece, the pills, the evaluation, the restaurant incident, the erased footage, had been designed to create a single narrative. Henry Dawson is losing his mind, and his loving daughter must step in to protect him. It was architecture. It was engineering. And it was 2 days away from working. "There's something else," Martin said. "If a temporary guardianship is granted, the guardian has authority over the ward's living arrangements and social contacts. That means Meredith could legally restrict who visits you and who you visit. She could keep me from Rosie. She could keep you from everyone." I stood and walked to the kitchen window. Ruth's garden was visible in the morning light, the willow bench casting a long shadow across the stone path. Somewhere beneath a flagstone near the north border, Kyle's transmitter was waiting. Somewhere on Riverside Drive, the FBI monitoring van would park in 3 days. And somewhere in a courthouse downtown, a judge I had never met was reading a petition built on lies. "Martin, I need you to file an opposition today. Attach the real bank records, the diazepam bottle analysis, and the DNA results. I want Judge Kwan to see what Meredith is actually doing before she signs anything. I'll need the FBI's cooperation. If I reference an ongoing federal investigation, it adds weight. Call Agent Diana Morales. I'll text you her number." I hung up and immediately called Sam. He answered with Rosie's voice in the background, singing a song about a caterpillar. The sound nearly broke me. "Sam, Meredith filed for guardianship. If the court grants it, she can legally block me from seeing Rosie. She can block you too. She could claim your contact with me as part of my erratic behavior." Sam was quiet for 4 seconds. When he spoke, his voice had the low, controlled edge of a man who had grown up in foster care and understood exactly what the system could do to a child. "What do we do?" "Martin is filing opposition today. The FBI knows. But I need you to do something for me. Keep Rosie close this weekend. Don't let her out of your sight. If Meredith is willing to file a guardianship petition 2 days before I'm supposed to record her, she knows something is shifting. She's accelerating." "Hank." Sam paused. "Rosie asked about you this morning. She asked if Flower Grandpa's sundrops were still open. She drew another picture, you and her in the garden, holding hands. She wrote your name at the top in green crayon." I closed my eyes. Through the window, a single sundrop at the far edge of the garden had opened early, catching the first light. It glowed like a small flame against the autumn brown. "Tell her the sundrops are waiting," I said. "Tell her Flower Grandpa will see her soon." I hung up and looked at the 14-page petition on my kitchen table. Every page was a lie. Every paragraph was a brick in the wall Meredith was building around me. But walls have doors, and doors have keys. And on Sunday evening in the garden, where Ruth taught me that even the most stubborn ground can be made to bloom, I was going to hand my daughter the key she wanted and watch her lock herself inside. 72 hours. That was what the court had given me to respond. It was also exactly how long I had to wait before the sundrops opened at sunset and the microphones hidden among the flowers began to listen. Meredith called me on Saturday evening at 6:08 p.m., 18 hours before the recording was scheduled to begin in Ruth's garden. I was sitting on the willow bench, reviewing the plan Morales had outlined 2 days earlier. 4 agents within a 2-block radius. Kyle, in the monitoring van on Riverside Drive. Morales and Hobbs with live audio and visual. Safety signal. Left collar, right hand. 90 seconds. I had rehearsed the gesture 11 times that afternoon, each time feeling the small vibration of the body wire against my collarbone, each time reminding myself that I was not alone. Then my phone rang, and Meredith's name appeared on the screen, and I was alone again. "Dad." Her voice was warm. That was the first warning. Meredith's warmth was never free. It was transactional, a currency she spent only when she expected a return. "I've been thinking about us, about everything that's happened. I think we've both let this go too far." I said nothing. In surgery, the most dangerous moment is not the cut. It is the pause before the cut, when the hand must decide between 2 paths and the heart is still beating beneath the blade. I let her fill the silence. I know the petition upset you, she continued. It wasn't supposed to feel like an attack. I filed it because I'm worried about you. Dr. Whitfield's evaluation, Dad. You don't trust him. But 3 separate indicators showed cognitive decline. I couldn't ignore that. I'm your daughter. If I don't protect you, who will? 3 separate indicators manufactured by a man whose medical degree came from a rented office in Myrtle Beach. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper. What do you want, Meredith? I want to come see you tomorrow. At the house. I want us to sit down and really talk. Like we haven't done since Mom died. No lawyers, no courts, no accusations. Just you and me. My pulse quickened. She was coming to the house. She was coming on Sunday, the exact day Morales had planned. But she was not supposed to initiate the meeting. I was supposed to call her, invite her to the garden, present myself as a broken man ready to surrender. She had moved first. And that meant one of 2 things. Either she genuinely wanted to resolve this, or she was accelerating towards something I had not anticipated. Come at 5, I said. We'll sit in the garden. I'd rather talk inside, Dad. It's getting cold. The garden. That's where your mother and I had every important conversation of our marriage. If you want to talk to me like family, you'll do it where family talks. A pause. 3 seconds. Then. Fine. 5 o'clock. The garden. She hung up. I immediately texted Morales. She called. She's coming tomorrow at 5. Her idea, not mine. She wants the house. I insisted on the garden. Confirmed. Morales replied in 40 seconds. Copy. We'll adjust to 4:30 setup. Do not deviate from the plan. Let her lead the conversation. Your only job is the power of attorney offer. We handle the rest. I set the phone down and looked at the garden. The sundrops were closed, waiting for tomorrow's dusk. The willow bench was empty. The microphone hidden in the bark was silent. Everything was in position. Everything except my certainty. Because at 6:31 p.m., 23 minutes after Meredith hung up, my phone buzzed again. Not a call. A text. From Meredith. I'm going to make this simple, Dad. Tomorrow you sign the power of attorney. Full authority, medical, financial, business. You sign it, and I withdraw the guardianship petition. The court case disappears. You keep the house. You keep the garden. You keep your dignity. We go back to normal. I stared at the screen. Then a second message arrived. If you don't sign, I'll have Dr. Whitfield file a supplemental evaluation Monday morning. The court will grant temporary guardianship by Wednesday. I will control your accounts, your medical decisions, and your living arrangements. I will sell the house. I will close the garden. And I will make sure you never see that little girl or her father again. A third message. This isn't a threat, Dad. It's arithmetic. You taught me that every decision is a calculation. So, calculate. I read the messages 3 times. Then I forwarded all 3 to Morales, to Martin Gallagher, and to Sam. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. And somewhere beneath the grief and the rage and the 4 decades of love I had poured into a daughter who was now holding my life hostage, I felt something I had not expected. Relief. Because Meredith had just done something no amount of FBI planning could have guaranteed. She had put her ultimatum in writing. She had threatened to use a fraudulent doctor, a forged evaluation, and a corrupt legal process to seize my estate. She had explicitly mentioned Rosie and Sam as leverage, and she had sent it through a digital channel that timestamps every word and cannot be erased. Morales called me at 6:54 p.m. Dr. Dawson, we have the texts. These are admissible. Combined with tomorrow's recording, we now have 2 independent evidence streams, digital and audio. If she repeats any of this in the garden, the case is airtight. She will, I said. She thinks she's closing a deal. She doesn't know she's opening a trial. One more thing. given the explicit threat to the child. I've contacted Buncombe County Child Protective Services. They'll place a temporary welfare flag on Rosie Keller's file. If Meredith attempts any legal action involving the child before we move, CPS will intervene. Thank you. Get some sleep, Dr. Dawson. Tomorrow is a long day. I hung up and called Sam. He answered in a whisper. Rosie was asleep in the next room. I saw the texts, he said. His voice was tight. The words pressed flat, like a man holding something heavy against his chest. She threatened Rosie. She actually put it in writing. She did. And that's going to end this. Hank, I need you to know something. If anything happens tomorrow, if this doesn't work, if she finds the wire, if she walks away, I'm not giving up. I've spent 7 years raising that little girl. I taught her to tie her shoes. I held her when she cried at night. I sat in the hallway outside her bedroom every time a thunderstorm hit because she was afraid of the dark. No court order and no text message is going to take her from me. Nothing is going to take her from you, Sam. Or from me. Silence. Then, softly, she drew another picture tonight. Before bed. You and her and me. Standing in the garden. She put sundrops all around us. She wrote at the bottom. I'm going to read it exactly. She wrote, "Family is a garden. You have to stay." I pressed the phone against my forehead and closed my eyes. 7 years old. She could name 12 flowers in Latin. She could hold a blossom with Ruth's spiral grip. And she could write a sentence that contained more truth than every legal document on my kitchen table combined. I'll stay, I said. I promise. I sat on the willow bench until the last light disappeared behind the Blue Ridge Mountains. The garden was dark, the sundrops were closed, the microphone was silent, the cameras were waiting. Tomorrow at 5 o'clock, my daughter would walk through the wrought iron gate with Ruth's initials and sit across from me on the bench where her mother used to read on summer evenings, and I would offer her exactly what she wanted. And it would be the last thing she ever took from me. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what satisfying happens next. Sunday, October 26th. The sky over Asheville was the color of old copper, the mountains dark beneath it, the air carrying the sweet rot of fallen leaves, and the faint mineral smell of the French Broad River 2 miles east. I had not slept. I had not tried. I spent the night in the kitchen, drinking coffee, reading Ruth's letters, and watching the clock move toward a moment I could not undo. At 4:30 p.m., Morales texted, "All units in position. Van on Riverside. Audio and visual confirmed. You are live in 30 minutes. At 4:47, I pressed the body wire once. Held for 2 seconds. Released. A small vibration against my collarbone. Live. At 4:52, I walked into Ruth's garden and sat on the willow bench. The sundrops were still closed, their golden petals folded tight against the afternoon light, waiting for the angle of the sun to drop below the ridge before they opened. Ruth used to say they were the most patient flowers in the world. They never bloomed early, never bloomed late, never tried to be something they were not. They waited for their moment, and when it came, they opened completely. I folded my hands in my lap and waited for mine. At 5:04 p.m., the wrought iron gate opened, and Meredith walked into the garden. She was dressed carefully. Navy wool coat, cream scarf, low heels that clicked against the stone path. Her hair was pulled back the way Ruth used to wear hers, and she carried a leather folder under her left arm. She looked composed, professional, and entirely certain that she was walking into a negotiation she had already won. "Dad." She stopped 3 feet from the bench. "Thank you for doing this. Sit down, Meredith." She sat at the opposite end of the willow bench, the leather folder on her lap. Between us was 18 inches of aged wood and 40 years of silence. "I brought the documents," she said. She opened the folder and removed a single page, a power of attorney form, pre-filled. My name already typed into the principal line, her name in the agent line, A blank space at the bottom, waiting for my signature. It's straightforward. Full authority over medical and financial decisions, including the Institute. Once you sign, I'll call Martin Gallagher and withdraw the petition Monday morning. Everything goes back to normal. Normal, I repeated. Normal, Dad. You keep the house. You keep the garden. I handle the business side so you don't have to worry. I looked at the document in her hands. I looked at the blank signature line. Then I looked at my daughter Ruth's eyes, Ruth's cheekbones, Ruth's stubborn jaw, and I asked the question I had carried for 11 days. Why did you sell her, Meredith? The air between us changed. I felt it the way I felt pressure, shifts in an operating room, a subtle drop, a held breath. The body of the conversation signaling that something vital was about to rupture. I don't know what you're talking about. Mary Daniels. Nashville. March 2016. You delivered a baby girl at Vanderbilt and sold her to a couple named Pierce for $75,000 through a private intermediary. You used your mother's middle name as an alias. The child was placed in foster care when the Pierces divorced, and she was adopted by a man named Sam Keller, who has raised her alone for 4 years. I paused. Her name is Rosie. She is 7 years old. She has your mother's eyes. Meredith's hands tightened on the leather folder. Her knuckles whitened. But her voice remained controlled. You've been talking to people you shouldn't be talking to. I've been talking to the truth. Something you abandoned. The same year you abandoned your daughter. She was not my daughter. The words came fast, sharp, expelled like something poisonous she had held too long. She was a mistake. A complication I couldn't afford. I was 31. I had just taken the CFO position. The board was watching everything I did. If they found out I'd had a child with a man I barely knew, a gardener, Dad, a man who trimmed hedges for a living, they would have questioned every decision I ever made. A gardener. Sam was Biltmore's head horticulturist, not a hedge trimmer. But Meredith had never seen the difference between growing things and managing them. She managed, she controlled, she cut what didn't serve her and discarded what she couldn't use. So you sold her. I placed her with a family for $75,000. That was a facilitation fee. The intermediary, Donald Varner. I have his letter. I have the account under Mary Daniels. I have the Vanderbilt records. Her composure cracked. Not the microfracture I had seen at the Institute, this was structural. Her left hand trembled against the folder. Her jaw tightened until I could see the muscles moving beneath the skin. It doesn't matter, she said. None of this matters. The guardianship petition is filed. Whitfield's evaluation is on record. The court will grant temporary authority by Wednesday. You can waive DNA tests and old hospital records all you want. It won't change the legal outcome. Whitfield, I said. Tell me about him. He's a qualified psychiatrist who, his real name is Paul Whitmore. His degree is from a diploma mill in Myrtle Beach that closed in 2017. He has 3 prior fraud convictions. You paid him $28,000 through a shell company called Meridian Health Corp to forge my psychiatric evaluation. Silence. 3 seconds. 5. The sundrops along the far bed were beginning to open, their petals unfurling in slow gold spirals against the darkening sky. Who told you that? She whispered. You put diazepam in my food, Meredith. 22 tablets over 2 months. You erased security footage. You moved $340,000 out of my accounts. You manufactured evidence to declare me incompetent. And 7 years ago, you sold my granddaughter, Ruth's granddaughter, to strangers for the price of a mid-range sedan. She stood. The leather folder fell to the stone path. The power of attorney page caught the evening breeze and slid beneath the bench. You don't understand, she said. Her voice had changed, not the corporate register, not the warm daughter, but something raw and fractured beneath both. You don't understand what it's like to live in your shadow. Hank Dawson, the great surgeon. Hank Dawson, who built the Institute. Hank Dawson, who loved his wife so perfectly that no one else could ever measure up. Mom was the only person you ever truly saw. I spent 39 years standing in her light, trying to be enough, and I was never not once enough. So you stole from me. I took what I earned. You drugged me. I gave you something to help you sleep. You sold your own child. Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. And then she said the sentence that I knew that Morales knew, that Hobbs knew, that Kyle in the van on Riverside Drive knew, would end everything. She was a mistake, Dad. And I would do it again. The sundrops were fully open now, glowing along the garden's edge like a row of small flames. The directional microphone in the bark beside my arm had captured every word. The cameras in the stone wall and the Japanese maple canopy had recorded every gesture, and the body wire vibrating against my collarbone had transmitted every syllable to a van parked 2 blocks away, where 2 federal agents were already reaching for their radios. I touched the left side of my collar with my right hand. 90 seconds. That was what Morales had promised. From the moment I touched my collar to the moment agents would be inside the garden. I counted the way I counted during surgery, steady, mechanical. Each number a heartbeat. Each heartbeat a step closer to something that could not be reversed. 1, 2, 3. Meredith saw the change in my face. She did not understand it yet, but her body understood. She stepped backward, her heel catching the edge of the stone path. "What did you do?" she said. 14. 15. 16. "Dad." "What did you do?" I did not answer. I sat on the willow bench with my hands folded in my lap, the same way I used to sit in the waiting room after a surgery, letting the silence carry the weight of what had already been decided. The sundrops glowed along the garden's edge. The evening air smelled of lavender and wood smoke. Somewhere on Riverside Drive, a van door was opening. 31. 32. 33. Meredith looked at the gate. Then she looked at me. Then she looked at the gate again. And I saw the calculation behind her eyes, the same arithmetic she had referenced in her text message 2 nights ago. Distance to the gate, 12 feet. Distance to her car on Chestnut Street, 40 yards beyond that. Time to reach the driver's seat, start the engine, disappear into the Asheville evening traffic. Maybe 3 minutes, maybe less. She ran. She made it 6 steps before the gate opened from the outside. And Agent Frank Hobbs stepped through, his badge held at chest height, his voice flat and enormous in the quiet garden. "Meredith Dawson Grant, FBI. Stop where you are." She stopped. Not because she chose to, but because her legs stopped choosing for her. I have seen that moment before in patients who receive a terminal diagnosis, in families who hear the word deceased for the first time. The body simply ceases its forward motion, as though the ground beneath it has become uncertain. Morales came through the gate behind Hobbs, followed by 2 agents. I had not met a tall woman with close-cropped hair and a broad-shouldered man who positioned himself between Meredith and the garden wall. Kyle remained in the van, recording. "Meredith Dawson Grant," Morales said, "you are under arrest for elder abuse, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, conspiracy to commit fraud, and trafficking of a minor. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Meredith's face was white. Not the controlled pallor I had seen at the Institute when I first said Mary Daniels. This was the white of someone watching their own architecture collapse, floor by floor, from the inside. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. Her hands hung at her sides. Ruth's pearl earrings caught the last of the sunset light and held it the way pearls hold everything quietly, without explanation. "You have the right to an attorney," Morales continued. "If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Do you understand these rights?" Meredith nodded. A single, mechanical dip of the head. "Dr. Whitfield Paul Whitmore was taken into custody 40 minutes ago at his residence in West Asheville," Hobbs said, addressing me but speaking loudly enough for Meredith to hear. He was in possession of forged medical documents relating to 4 separate patients, including you. His computer contained financial records linking him to Meridian Health Corp. And to payments received from Miss Dawson Grant's personal accounts. 4 patients. Not 3. They had found a 4th family. The network was larger than anyone had known, and my daughter had been a node in its wiring. The tall female agent stepped forward with handcuffs. Meredith looked at me. "Dad." Her voice was barely audible. "Please." That single word, "please," contained more truth than anything she had said in 11 days. Not the corporate warmth, not the calculated threats, not the rehearsed justifications about living in my shadow. Just please. Spoken the way she used to say it when she was 5 years old and wanted to stay up past bedtime, when she was 12 and wanted to borrow Ruth's pearl earrings for a school dance, when she was 19, and asked me to fund her first semester at Wake Forest. "Please, Dad." The word of a child who still believed her father could fix anything. But I could not fix this. No surgeon in the world could repair what she had broken, not with a scalpel, not with forgiveness, not with 41 years of steady hands. Some damage is structural. Some wounds are made by the person holding the knife. The agent placed the handcuffs on Meredith's wrists. The click was small, metallic. Final, the sound of a door closing that would not open again for years. And then I heard the gate. It opened slowly, the wrought iron creaking against its hinges, and through it came Sam Keller, carrying Rosie on his hip. He had not been part of the plan. Morales had explicitly told him to stay home. But Sam was a man who had spent 7 years protecting a child the world had tried to throw away. And he was not the kind of man who stayed home when that child's future was being decided in a garden 2 miles from his house. Rosie was wearing her ladybug boots and the green jacket with the rolled sleeves. Her brown curls were loose around her face. She looked at the agents, at the handcuffs, at the woman in the navy coat, whose wrists were bound in front of her, and she did not understand. She could not understand. She was 7, but she understood flowers. She squirmed down from Sam's arms and walked across the stone path to the sundrop bed. She knelt the same way she had knelt 6 days ago when Hank first brought her to the garden and plucked a single blossom. Golden, open, trembling slightly in the evening air. She held it with the spiral grip, thumb and forefinger below the petals, the flower resting in her palm like a small torch. Then she walked to Meredith. The agents tensed. Morales raised a hand. "Wait." Sam took a half step forward, then stopped. Everyone in the garden held their breath except the child, who did not know there was anything to hold. Rosie stood in front of Meredith and looked up at her. Olive green eyes meeting olive green eyes. Ruth's face reflected twice, once in the woman who had betrayed it, once in the child who had inherited it. "You look sad," Rosie said. Meredith's composure shattered. Not cracked, shattered. The way glass shatters when the frequency finally matches. When the vibration reaches the exact pitch the structure cannot absorb. Tears fell down her face in 2 straight lines. Her cuffed hands trembled. Rosie lifted the sundrop and placed it gently between Meredith's bound fingers. "Flowers help when you're sad," she said. "Flower Grandpa taught me that." Meredith looked at the blossom in her hands. She looked at Rosie. And then she looked at me, and in that moment, the last moment, we would share in Ruth's garden for years. I saw something I had not seen since she was a child, standing at her mother's bedside the night Ruth came home from the hospital after a miscarriage, holding a fistful of sundrops she had picked from the garden because she believed flowers could heal anything. She mouthed 2 words. "I'm sorry." The agents led her through the gate. The garden went quiet. The sundrops glowed. And Rosie walked back to me, climbed onto the willow bench, and leaned her head against my arm. "Flower Grandpa," she said. "Who was that lady?" I put my arm around her. The lavender border rustled in the evening breeze. Ruth's scent, lavender and honey, drifted through the garden like a hand placed gently on my shoulder. "Someone who got lost," I said. "A long time ago." The trial began on November 15th. In the Buncombe County Federal Courthouse, 3 blocks from the church, where Ruth and I were married. I will not describe the proceedings in detail. Lawyers turn human suffering into procedure, and I do not want to reduce what happened in Ruth's garden to exhibits and objection numbers. What I will tell you is this. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Meredith was found guilty on all counts: elder abuse, financial exploitation, conspiracy to commit fraud, and sale of a minor child. Judge Patricia Kwan sentenced her to 7 years. Dr. Paul Whitmore received 10 years for fraud, conspiracy, and 3 counts related to the other families he destroyed before mine. Sam sat behind me with Rosie in his lap. She was drawing sundrops on a legal pad an attorney had given her. Yellow crayon pressed hard against the paper. She did not understand what was happening. She understood only that Flower Grandpa was sitting very still. Martin Gallagher filed a motion the same week to void the guardianship petition. Judge Kwan granted it in 12 minutes. My accounts were restored. The $340,000 was frozen and returned through a federal recovery process. The Institute Board removed Meredith as CFO and voted to restore my portrait to the founder's wall. I told them to leave it near the fire exit. I did not need a portrait to remember who built that building. Grace Yamamoto filed a petition to recognize my biological relationship to Rosie and grant Sam permanent custody with grandparent visitation rights. The court approved it in January. Sam and I sat in a hallway afterward, silent, while Rosie ran between us, showing a drawing of 3 people standing in a garden surrounded by yellow flowers. At the bottom, in green crayon, my family. I framed that drawing. It hangs in the kitchen next to the window, overlooking Ruth's garden. Winter arrived the way it always does in Asheville, slowly, then all at once. The sundrops retreated underground. The lavender went dormant. The Japanese maples dropped their last leaves and stood bare against the December sky. Ruth's garden slept, and I let it sleep, because I had learned that rest is not death. Rest is preparation. On Christmas morning, Sam and Rosie arrived at 8. Rosie wore a red dress, white tights, and the ladybug boots she refused to replace. She carried a gift wrapped in newspaper. She had insisted on wrapping it herself and handed it to me with both hands. The way you hand someone something precious. Inside was a clay pot, small and lopsided, from her school art class. Planted in the center was a single sundrop bulb, dormant, buried in dark soil. "It's for Grandma Ruth," she said. "So she has flowers even in winter." I held the pot the way I used to hold a heart during surgery, gently, completely, aware that it contained a life I did not fully understand but was responsible for protecting. I placed it on the windowsill beside her drawing. "Will it bloom, Flower Grandpa, in spring?" When the time is right. Sam made breakfast: scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with honey. Ruth's Christmas menu, which I had described to him once, and which he had memorized without being asked. We ate with the clay pot between us and the garden visible through the window, bare and quiet and full of seeds that had not yet decided what to become. After breakfast, I drove to Raleigh, 3 hours east on I-40, through the Piedmont, past tobacco fields and church steeples. I arrived at the correctional facility at noon and sat in a visiting room with plastic chairs and fluorescent lights. Meredith came in wearing a gray uniform. She had lost weight. Her hair was shorter. Ruth's pearl earrings were gone, confiscated during processing, stored in a plastic bag with her other belongings. She sat across from me and folded her hands the way she had folded them at my father's desk. Except now her wrists were bare and her fingers trembled. I placed a letter on the table. 3 pages, handwritten, on stationery. Ruth gave me 20 years ago. "I won't read it to you," I said, "but I want you to know what it says. It says I love you. It says what you did was wrong and the consequences are just. It says Ruth would have forgiven you, because Ruth forgave everything, and I am learning to do the same. It says Rosie is safe and growing, and one day, when you are ready, and she is ready, I hope you will know her." Meredith's eyes filled, her hands pressed flat against the table. It also says I failed you. I continued. That I spent so many years loving your mother and building the institute that I did not see you in the hallway, waiting for me to turn around. I cannot undo that. But I can tell you now what I should have told you every day for 39 years. I placed my hand over hers. You were always enough, Meredith. She broke. Not the controlled fracture from the garden or the collapse during arrest. This was the breaking that heals the rupture, that lets light into a wound sealed too long. She wept with her forehead on the table and her hands beneath mine. And I sat with her the way I once sat with patients' families after surgery, offering no false comfort, only presence. I drove home through winter dark. The mountains reappeared outside Asheville like old friends. I walked through the back door into Ruth's garden. The beds were bare. The sundrops were underground. I knelt beside the sundrop bed, the same spot where Rosie had knelt, where Ruth had knelt before her, and pressed my palm against the frozen earth. I kept my promise, I said. The garden is safe. The sky was wide and full of stars. Somewhere in Raleigh, my daughter was reading a letter by fluorescent light. Somewhere in Asheville, a 7-year-old girl was sleeping in ladybug boots with a crayon in her hand. And here, in the garden where everything began, the seeds waited in the dark, patient as sundrops, certain as spring. God does not explain his timing. He does not offer blueprints or guarantees, but he plants things in the soil of our lives, people, moments, small golden flowers that bloom only at dusk, and he trusts us to water them. I stood, brushed the dirt from my knees, and went inside to wait for spring.